Well, thank you very much for coming this morning. My name is Sophie Althorn, and I am an immigration attorney. And my practice is in Mountain View, which is very close by to Sunnyvale. It's just the next city north of here. And I focus on helping investors and international companies and startup founders and extraordinary individuals find ways to come to the United States, to live here and work here legally, and also how to bring your families here with you. So I'm here because I love to help people navigate U.S. immigration law. It's really complex, it's really labyrinthine. I got exposed to immigration law from my father, who practiced immigration law for 35 years before he passed away. He was my mentor, and I learned a lot from him. And as a child and growing up, it always just struck me what important work he did, enabling people to come to America and build their dreams and start their companies, big corporations, scientists. It was really moving to me what he could do for people, so I wanted to follow in his footsteps. This is me in Turkey. I went there in 2008. It was beautiful. The people were so kind. I had a wonderful time. So I just wanted to share this quote with you. This is from a U.S. federal panel of judges in a written opinion in a case, just to give you an idea of how complicated immigration law is. Immigration law bears a striking resemblance to King Minos' labyrinth in ancient Crete. The tax laws and the Immigration and Nationality Act are examples we have cited of Congress's ingenuity in passing statutes certain to accelerate the aging process of judges. So it's really complicated. There's federal laws, there's federal regulations, there's federal court cases, there's labor code, there's Department of Labor administrative court cases. So there's a lot of moving parts that all work in very complicated and interconnected ways. But my goal is to walk you through it in a straightforward manner so you can start to think about which of these options is the best for you and what that will look like and what you need to do to pursue that. So I just wanted to talk about some concepts before we get into the visa details, because there's a lot of jargon and a lot of words that some of them mean the same thing, some of them sound similar but mean very different things, so I just wanted to give you an overview. So, did all of you get B1, B2 visas to come here for this trip? Okay, so you probably went to a US consulate, maybe in Istanbul. So that's part of the US Embassy, it's part of the Department of State, part of the federal government, the State Department, and they're international offices, and they are allowed to issue people visas in their passports. But when you're inside the United States, seeking an immigration benefit here, you don't necessarily have to leave and go back home to your consulate that you went to. You might be able to do everything through USCIS, and that's part of the Department of Homeland Security, which is a different department in the federal government, not the Department of State. So they're two totally separate government entities. But they're both charged with interpreting the immigration and nationality laws and administering benefits for those. So USCIS stands for U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And that's where you would go to switch from B2 visitor status to maybe an E2 investor status without leaving the United States. They help people who are here in the United States already. And so there's basically three main categories that newcomers to the United States fall into. There are actually other categories, but we're just going to keep it simple and focus on what's relevant to you. So right now, you're here as non-immigrants in B1 or B2 status, visiting for tourism or for business and you're allowed to stay here temporarily for that purpose. You're not allowed to work, you don't have work authorization, you are allowed to have business meetings or enter into contracts, but you can't get paid as an employee in the United States on that non-immigrant status. There are other types of non-immigrant status, such as E2, L1A. That's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. And then later, the next step could be to become a permanent resident. And that's a little bit confusing of a term because there are several other words that also mean the same thing. So being a permanent resident is the same thing as having a green card. So green card equals permanent resident. And it's also the same thing as being an immigrant. So you might hear those words, they all mean the same thing. Permanent resident is an immigrant who has a green card. And the green cards aren't even green. That was the case, I don't know, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, but they're not even green anymore. But a permanent resident means that you're allowed to live in the United States for the rest of your life. You're allowed to travel in and out pretty much freely, with some exceptions. And you can work here, you pay taxes here. And one of the key benefits is that it can lead to citizenship. If you want to become a citizen one day, you have to be a permanent resident first. For some people, under some circumstances, it might be possible to just skip the non-immigrant process and go directly to being a permanent resident and then a citizen. But usually people find a temporary way to stay here first. And then after they're here, maybe they have family who sponsors them, or employment or investment to get them the green card later on. It takes 5 years of being a permanent resident to become a citizen. But if you're married to a US citizen, it only takes 3 years. So that's an exception. But for most people, it takes 5 years to become a citizen. And I was trying to figure it out, but I think with Turkey, dual citizenship might be possible with the United States.
Yes.
Okay. And it seemed like there was some complicated paperwork with the Turkish government that you have to file to retain your Turkish citizenship when you become a US citizen. That's possible. Okay, so the three categories that we're going to be talking about today for non-immigrant visas and how they lead to green cards are managers and executives of foreign companies, specialized knowledge workers, which would be your key employees who you might want to also get over here to start your US branch of your foreign company, and then coming as an investor. So the first one we'll talk about is international intercompany transferee managers and executives. So that is people who have been working at a foreign company and they're being transferred to the US branch of the company to work here, either as a manager or an executive in the United States. And so that process is called an L1A, and that's a non-immigrant temporary status. And then later on, it's somewhat related to a green card process, which is EB, employment-based category 1C, which is a green card for managers and executives who have transferred here from foreign companies. So in order to start this process, in order to qualify, you would need to have worked for 1 year out of the last 3 years for your company in Turkey or Azerbaijan or Europe, a foreign company, and that company needs to have a qualifying relationship with a company in the United States. So that could be a parent company, a subsidiary company, or an affiliate company. common ownership. But the foreign company and the US company have to have common ownership. And so the foreign company is transferring you to work in the United States office, and you would be coming here to manage the office or be an executive of the US company. So this visa, this L1A non-immigrant status, usually lasts for 3 years at first, and you can extend it for up to a total of 7 years to be in the United States. But if your US company is a new company that has been doing business for less than 1 year, then when you come here, your visa, the petition and your visa and your stay will only be valid for 1 year. And then at the end of the first year, you have to renew your status, and you have to show, look, my company's in business, we have an office, we have contracts, we're getting money in, we're hiring people, there's people here who I'm actually managing. They want to make sure that it's a real business that's legitimate and that the size and the operation of the business necessitate having you here. They don't want it to just be, you know, an empty room and you sit there just enjoying the visa but not doing any work for the company. So yeah, it can be extended up to 7 years. And so that process starts with a petition that gets filed with USCIS inside the United States. Whether you're ultimately going to change your status from B1 or B2 to an L1A without leaving, or if you go back to Turkey and get your visa at the consulate there. In either of those situations, it starts off with the company filing a petition to USCIS in the United States. And that goes through, you know, there's a lot of evidence that's required to show that the companies meet all of the requirements, that legal relationship between the foreign company and the US company, that you're really a manager or an executive, or maybe you've been somebody with specialized knowledge at the foreign company, that the US company is doing business in the United States and at least one foreign company, employment pay stubs to show that you've been working there for at least 1 year out of the last 3 years. And then if it's a new office, showing that the office exists and that you've set things up and that it's really doing business. So the government filing fees to file an L1A petition, it's a base fee of $325 plus an anti-fraud fee of $500. And then it typically is taking USCIS right now about 4 weeks to decide the petition. But if you want them to make a decision in 15 days or less, you can pay an extra $1,225 for premium processing, and then they'll make the decision within 2 weeks. So the whole thing could take as little as 2 weeks, and then if you were outside of the US, like if you went back to Turkey while this was happening, then maybe you could get your visa within another 2 weeks. So perhaps if everything went very smoothly, you could be back here within a month. But if you decided to stay here and just change your status, that can happen within 2 weeks if everything goes well. So then the other part of this, the EB1C, is the green card option that is available for managers and executives. And this kicks in after you've been, it's an option for after the first year. So if you've been in the US working as an L1A manager or an executive for 1 year, then you can pursue this green card option. And it's a really great green card option because typically there are 3 stages or three components. The first is that in an employment-based green card, the employer has to test the U.S. labor market, advertise your job to U.S. workers, and see if there's anybody else who's qualified to take your job. If there is, you can't get a labor certification and you can't get the green card. So this is a fantastic route because that whole process, which is called PERM, is not required for managers and executives. You just get to skip it. There's an assumption that you are here for a reason, that you are needed, and so you get to skip straight to step 2, which is the company's green card petition for you. And because all the visas, all the green card numbers are current for that category, there's no extra wait, so you can actually file your green card application at the same time. So with this process, it is possible to get a green card within about 6 months, which is, again, available after the first year of being here as an L1A manager or executive. So, so that's a really good option. And then the costs for the government for the green card in this EB1C category would be $580 for the petition, and then and the petition is where the company says, like, look, we're a U.S. company, we're doing business, we can hire this person, we can pay them, we meet all the requirements. And then the green card application is another form that you and your family members would fill out, and that's the part where you say, hi, I'm the person that they want to hire, I'm not a criminal, I'm not a terrorist, I'm a good person, I don't have infectious diseases. So there's 2 separate components. And so the first one, the petition, is $580, and the second one, the green card application, it's $1,070 per adult and $635 per child under 13. So that is the process for managers and executives. So now we're going to talk about specialized knowledge workers, which would be employees that you want to bring with you to work in your U.S. office.
Can I ask a question
Mm-hmm.
about the L1B, L1A?
L1A.
Yeah, is there a limitation that actually, do we have to live here all year, or we can go back to Turkey?
No, you can travel. You're supposed to. I can look up the exact language for you if you email me, but the basic idea is you're allowed to travel, you're allowed to go back and forth, but the primary purpose is for you to live here and run the business here, but travel is part of it. And there's no requirement as to the number of hours that you would work that job in the U.S.
Okay, so we can stay 6 months in Turkey, 6 months here.
Well,
not the straight.
Not
6
straight,
months.
but yeah, if you break it up.
2 months there, 1
Yeah.
month there, 2 months here, 1 month there.
That would probably work. Yeah.
What about company size? I mean, is there any enforcement for the company size? You have to hire, let's say, 10 people?
Yeah, so I'm
10
glad you raised that hiring requirement. That's for the investor visa and green card, which we'll get to in a little bit. But that is a benefit of the L1A. There's no absolute financial requirements for the company. There's no absolute hiring requirements, so you have more flexibility. You need to show, what's the purpose of your U.S. operation? Do you have enough money to make it work? Will you hire enough people to make it work? But you get to define that scope. It's not mandated in specific monetary amounts or employee amounts by the government. And so if it's a startup, then you might need to show a business plan showing how you're going to make it work. But you get a lot more control in this scenario.
In practicality, how much money we have to show to convince them?
There's no, it really depends. It's just, what's your business idea and what do you need to make it work? So I'm just guessing here. It might be good to show at least $50,000 to get started or something, but they don't have a number requirement for the money.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
Let's say I'm an Innovis as an office or a company organization in Turkey,
Yes.
and then same owners, 4 or 5 owners, establish another company here and call it another name, Innovis Silicon Valley or
Mm-hmm.
totally different name. So still, the people who work in Turkey can get apply for L1A, even a
Yes.
different name, or
Yes, as long as, if it's the same name, that's evidence that there's a qualifying relationship, but more significant is the ownership.
oh,
And if it's owned by the same people, that qualifies.
is there any limit on that part? Let's say 80% is same, but 20% I got a VC or I got an
Yeah.
angel investor here.
I believe it's 50% common ownership.
50%.
50% Euro company of the US.
One way to show the qualifying relationship between the two companies, like if the Turkish company owned the US company 100%, that's a qualifying relationship. If the US company owned the Turkish company, that's a qualifying relationship. But if you have 5 investors who own the Turkish company and 5 investors who own the US company, but only 3 or 4 of those are the same investors, each company would have at least 50%. 50% of each company would be owned by the same people, so that would also constitute a qualifying relationship. And I believe it's a 50% threshold.
I have a question. In this case, the type of the entity is important or not?
It can be an
Like I know it's this type of non-profit organization, so in
yeah,
this case, you know, that there was the financial
right.
things.
It's actually not for a nonprofit, so it's for companies who are doing business. But it could be an LLC, it could be
C corp.
a C corp, S corp, Inc. Any of those are fine. There's even ways to try to make it work for sole proprietorships. It's much more challenging, but any of those business forms could work. Okay, should we go to the next?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a related visa, L1B, and this is for people who have specialized knowledge about your company. And one reason this might be helpful to explore this option is because if there's a lot of people from your company that want to come here, you can't get 10 L1A visas for executives and have them all hanging out in your Silicon Valley office, not running things or managing people. There has to be a sufficient body of work and responsibility for each manager and executive to have to warrant there being a visa for them. So you can't have 10 executives just sitting around doing nothing. So there's another type of visa, which is the L1B, and this is for people with specialized knowledge. And specialized knowledge is a legal term of art that's defined as special knowledge possessed by an individual of the organizations about the organization's product, service, research, equipment, techniques, management, or other interests, and its application in international markets, or an advanced level of knowledge or expertise in the organization's processes and procedures. So, somebody who knows a lot about what it is that makes your company work. What is your product? What is your service? What are the internal, very significant procedures that are necessary to make things run? And there's a lot of similarities between the L1B and the L1A, but some of the significant differences are that with the L1B, it's a maximum of 5 years, not 7 years, so it's a little bit less. And the green card option is not the same. You can either get an employment-based second preference or employment-based third preference green card, but these people would not qualify for the EB1C manager or executive green card that we talked about for the L1A people. And so for these types of green cards, EB3 would be for somebody with a bachelor's degree, and EB2 would be for somebody with an advanced degree, like a master's or bachelor's plus 5 years of experience. And the difference for these guys, or girls, is that you do have to go through that first phase of testing the labor market, called PERM, and trying to recruit U.S. workers for the job. So it's more challenging, it takes longer. At a minimum, that process takes 6 months, but 30% of those are audited, and of that 30%, half are found to have problems, and it can, if there's an audit, it can drag on a long time. So this is an inferior green card process. But something to mention about both the L1A and the L1B is that if you're married, your spouse can get a work permit with either option, which is very nice. Okay, so now, does anybody have any questions about specialized knowledge workers? Okay, so then we'll move on to investors. So, if you have your own money that you got legally, you could have received it through a gift, though, and you want to start a brand new company in the United States that is not related to your company in Turkey or Azerbaijan or somewhere in Europe, then this would be the way to go. The E2 visa is called a treaty investor visa. It's not available to everybody on the planet. There has to be a treaty between the United States and the country that you're from. So there is a treaty with Turkey. I don't know if there's a treaty with Azerbaijan. You think there is?
Yeah.
Okay. So if there's a treaty and you are a national of that country, then you can come here. And so the legal definition is kind of simple. It's that you have invested or will be actively in the process of investing a substantial amount of capital in a bona fide enterprise in the United States. So there is no bright line rule that says how much money you have to invest for this. The more money, the better. The more startup capital it takes to successfully establish your business, the smaller the proportion of the investment actually needs to be. So I normally would recommend, for a strong case, that you would invest somewhere at least $100,000, possibly up to $250,000 or $300,000 for a stronger case. And the way you find out if it's enough is you look at all of the startup expenses of your business, and then you see what percentage of that your investment would be. And then there's this rule, this proportionality rule, which is that, like, if you're starting an internet or a consulting business and all you need is a desk in a room and a computer and to pay some salary, like, maybe all of your startup expenses are just $60,000. So in that case, you better invest at least $60,000 in that business or more. But if you're going to start an electric car manufacturing plant, which requires millions and millions of dollars of startup capital, you don't have to invest millions and millions. You need enough to get it going, and it can be a much smaller percentage of the startup capital. So it slides based on what type of business you have. And so your job, if you have this visa, is to solely develop and direct this enterprise and your investment into it. you need at least 50% ownership of this company, and it's also significant because the company has to have the same nationality as you. So let's say you have a partner from China and you guys would ideally have that person own 51% and you would own 49%. That's not going to work. It would be considered a Chinese company. It needs to be at least 50% Turkish owned to make it a Turkish company, to make it count for the E2 visa. These visas are good for 2 years. Sometimes you might be allowed to enter for a longer duration, but you can keep renewing it indefinitely. Unlike the L1A, where there's a 7-year time limit, and the L1B, where there's a 5-year time limit, with the E2, you can keep renewing as long as you continue to meet all of the requirements. There's also a requirement that the business won't just provide marginal profits. They really want this to be for businesses that have a lot of growth potential. Not necessarily the Silicon Valley hockey stick growth curve, but if you have that, that's great. They want to see a very detailed 5-year business plan showing exactly what this will cost year by year. And they don't want it to merely eke out enough money to provide income for you and your family. They want it to have more growth than just the income for the investor to live off of. So for this visa and this status, you can either do a change of status in the United States by filing an application, a petition with USCIS, or you can leave, go back to Turkey, and then you would file directly at the US consulate in probably Istanbul. For the investor visas, if you're abroad, you don't have to file a petition in the United States with USCIS first. With the L1A, the company has to file a petition with USCIS, and if that gets approved, then you go get your visa in Turkey. With the E2, if you're in Turkey, you just file it in Turkey, and you don't have to do anything with USCIS in the US first. And so the things that you need to prove for this type of visa are, that the treaty exists, that the individual and or the business possess the nationality of the treaty country, that you have already invested or you're actively in the process of investing. It is possible to invest in existing businesses. If you want to do that, the best way is probably to put your money into an escrow account with the condition that if your visa is approved, the money will be released to the US company, and if it's denied, you would get your money back. So that's kind of a safe way to do it if it's going to be like a partnership, and if you don't want to do the investment without visa. You have to show that this is going to be a real and operating commercial enterprise, that your investment is substantial, that it's more than a marginal one solely for earning a living, that you're in a position to develop and direct the enterprise. So do you have past investment experience, past managerial experience, past experience with starting up other companies? That's something they look at too. And another important thing about this visa is that it's non-immigrant, and that your intent must be that when the E2 status terminates, when you're done, you really plan to leave the United States. And what that means is that if you do want to get a green card one day, you couldn't do an adjustment of status process inside the United States to get your green card. You'd have to leave, go to an appointment in Ankara, and apply for your immigrant visa there, and then come back in as an immigrant. Because the purpose of this E2 is for people who are just coming to do their investment and then leaving, not staying. So then talking
I
about,
have questions here.
yeah,
There's some things going on, especially in Middle Eastern countries. And so I came here as investors, but I did business here, I made money here, but because of the political situations, went back to Turkey, and I go prisons. And so in this case, can I apply for asylum here? Asylum cases like the immigrants type.
Yeah.
Visa.
yeah, asylum is another option.
But at the first place, I was an E2 visa holder.
That's okay.
Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. You have to apply within 180 days of entering the United States, most recently, for asylum.
Mm-hmm.
And it's based on a fear of persecution. And it can be based on political, religious, social group. That's something we can talk more about if you'd like to email me or call me. Or we can talk more at the end, but absolutely, yes. And if you were here longer, like let's say you were here for 5 years as an investor, you haven't left, but if the country situation changes and events worsen, then even if you haven't been there within the last 6 months, you can still apply for asylum later on. Okay, so let's talk now about EB5, which is the investor green card. So this is similar to the E2 in some ways because you would be putting your own money into a new US company that you're starting, but it has a lot of significant differences which are important to remember. The traditional EB5 rules are that you invest $1 million. It doesn't have to be into a new business, it could be an existing business. But that because of your investment, you have created 10 new jobs, 10 new full-time jobs for US workers. So this would be citizens, permanent residents, your L1B people wouldn't count because they would be here on temporary non-immigrant visas. So that's the basic, that's where it got started from. And then there's some variations. The US Census Bureau, which takes measurements of the population in different ways, has identified places called targeted employment areas, which are usually low-income urban areas that need jobs created there. And so if you locate your new company in a targeted employment area, it changes the amount of capital required for the investment. You only need to invest $500,000 instead of $1 million. You still need to hire 10 US workers directly. And this investor green card is really for investors who want to take an active role in managing and directing the company, not passive investors. So if you want to be a passive investor, there's another way to do it, and that is called a regional center. There are many regional centers in the United States. They are usually land development companies that are structured as limited partnerships, and they usually put their projects in targeted employment areas. And because they're a regional corporation, they have a different role where you don't need to hire 10 people directly, you can create 10 jobs indirectly. So you would put $500,000 into this regional center. They would use it to build a housing development or a stadium in a low-income area. That, as a result, would create 10 jobs maybe for construction workers, and then that would be sufficient for you to get an investor green card. So there's the traditional 1 million plus 10 jobs, There's the targeted employment area, which is 500,000 plus 10 jobs. And then there's the regional center, which is 500,000 plus 10 indirect jobs.
I have a question for the 500,000 K situation. So are you going to take money back or to losing that money?
Are you going to take money back or are you losing money?
I mean, it's like a 500,000
With the regional center,
Yeah.
so your investment must by law be at risk and subject to total loss if fortunes reverse. But there are some reputable ones that have a history of giving you a return on your investment after 5 years, perhaps. But it is important to research regional centers carefully because there have been some in the news for fraud, and I wouldn't want any of you guys to get involved in that. So make sure you vet them thoroughly. Yeah, if you want to be a passive investor and not run the business, the regional center is a good way to do it. And the timing of this process is somewhat interesting. And it's slow too. So initially, to get it started, you make a business plan and you have your business incorporated. If you've already been running your business as an E2 investor, you can use that investment again. So if you put in $200,000 for your E2, that can count towards the $500,000 for your green card, for your EB5 green card. But if you want to be here right away, you definitely need a non-immigrant status that's different, because just to get the initial green card, it's taking 16 months. So almost a year and a half to get the investor green card petition approved. And you have to show that your money is committed, but you don't have to invest all of it yet in order to do that. But then once you get your green card approved, it's only valid for 2 years. You're called a conditional permanent resident. And in those 2 years, it's your job to finish investing the money, to actually hire the 10 US workers and create the 10 jobs. And then in the 90-day period before the 2-year anniversary of your green card, you have to file another round of documents, which is the removal of conditions, and that is taking 17 months. So it's actually about a 5-year process to get through the whole EB5 road and have your full-fledged green card on the other side. Though, after the first year and a half, you're a conditional permanent resident. You're allowed to live here in that status and work, and you have to be, creating your company at that point. So, it's kind of trade-offs, like between the E2 and the L1A, and then the different green cards that come from them, based on what's important to you and what your needs are and your family's needs. So, just to review a little bit, there's...
I have a question relating to EB5. Let's say I have an existing company, and at the first place I invest $250,000, but now I make like more than $1 million. In this case, can I still apply for EB5?
Yes, you would need to either, if you've already invested 250, you would need to invest another 250 in a targeted employment area, or 750 if your office was located somewhere else, and then you could apply for the EB5. So, if you are working for a company that you like and you want to continue working with them and start a U.S. company, a branch of your U.S. company, that's a really easy way to do it with the L1A as a manager or an executive. And you can get your key employees here too. If you want to invest by putting your own personal money into starting a new business, then the E2 could work. I should also mention for the E2 that you can bring key employees from Turkey or Azerbaijan to the US. They can also get E2 visas if they're essential employees for the business. And, but yeah, the downside of the investor path is just the length of time that it takes to get the green card. Your spouse and your dependent children who are under 21 can come with you. Your spouse can get a work permit as an L2 or an E2. And timing, these visas have time limits, so if you decide to permanently live in the US, you and your family, you should apply for a green card before your non-immigrant status runs out, and then citizenship is possible after 5 years.